Okay, this is the 5-minute podcast review for Friday, March 31st, 2017, and jumping right into it with the first podcast, which is called Laughing Dead. So basically, the concept is each episode, comedians come on and talk about their worst ever gigs, the times they died on stage. Just have a listen to this clip where Australian comedian Luke McGregor is telling one of his stories.
My worst gig was a date, and I did that thing where I invited her to come watch me perform, and I'm like, great, if I do well, brilliant. And it was probably the worst gig performance-wise I've ever had. Like, the crowd were good, but I was terrible. I tried some new stuff. It bombed so badly that she got up as I was performing and snuck her way through the crowd and walked past stage because you had to get out of this room. And
while you're still on stage?
While I was still on stage. And mouths, I'm sorry, and then walks out the door.
Wow.
And then I told the crowd what happened, and she saved the gig.
So that's just a little sample of Laughing Dead, and the host, by the way, who you could hear in the background of that clip, is Pakistani stand-up comedian Sami Shah, who also has his own stories to tell, which he does in the first episode. So if you want to try a bit more of Laughing Dead, the podcast link is on your screen. Next podcast is The Curator. And to explain The Curator, I first need to explain a little bit about Monocle 24. So you might have heard of Monocle. It started as a kind of upmarket magazine out of London, covering things like culture and business, travel and design, food, that sort of thing. Anyhow, Monocle extended into online radio, which they call Monocle 24, and this produces a collection of audio programs around the same sort of themes as the magazine. Many of those Monocle 24 programs also exist as standalone podcasts, but The Curator is their single 1-hour podcast that brings together the highlights, usually interviews, from across all the Monocle 24-hour radio in the past week. Here's the intro to a recent episode, which will just give you a bit of a feel for the tone of The Curator.
Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle 24 with me, Marco Sippi, and Daniel Cecapelli.
Over the next 60 minutes, we'll have some of the best interviews and reports from the past week right here on Monocle 24. That's highlights from our studios at Midori House and, of course, from around the world.
This week we hear of the highlights at Pity Taste Food Festival in Florence.
Locals and foreigners alike happily munched away on Matte's latest offering. It showed that even Italy's most traditional brands could still surprise, and why at Pitti, it helps to have buyers thinking with their palate and not just their pocketbook.
Plus how one entrepreneur revolutionized the business of nail art.
And I called it WA, which stands for We Ain't Hoes. So funny.
All that and much, much more over the next hour right here on The Curator with me, Daniel Cecapelli, and Marcus Hippie.
Okay, so basically The Curator is a good way to sample the Monocle 24 offering, or if you're like me, it's just a good way to get a 1-hour packaged, or I should say curated dose of highbrow listening for the week without overdosing on all the Monocle 24 content. That's The Curator, and the link is on your screen. Next up, podcast number 3 is Reply All. Now, I had to check back to make sure I hadn't already covered Reply All, and I'm surprised I hadn't, as I've been listening to it from day one, and it's one of the more popular podcasts out there. It'd be easy to say Reply All is a show about the internet, but that really probably gives the wrong idea. It's not at all a tech show. It's closer to the mark to say Reply All is more a show about internet culture, the stuff we see and do online, or often the stuff we didn't know was happening online. For example, there's an episode on an Australian teenager who tried to make the most boring Facebook group possible, but of course it became a cult hit. Or there's episodes about scam websites and how they work. But I think if there's one episode you should try, it's episode 15 on the phenomena of SWATing. Now, I'll play you just the intro as a teaser.
Blair Myhand is a police chief in Apex, North Carolina. It's a suburb of Raleigh-Durham, 42,000 people, upper middle class. Myhand says that policing Apex is like policing Mayberry, the town from the Andy Griffith Show.
9 o'clock at night, people are in their houses with their families and they're going to bed. And, sometimes we roll the sidewalks up at midnight. It's a very low crime community. I think we've had 2 homicides ever in this town.
One summer night, Apex 911 got an unusually disturbing call.
A person had claimed to have killed several people and was holding a woman hostage in the house.
The caller gave the dispatcher his name and his address.
It was one of those ones that make you, as a police officer, think, this is serious. We went into action very quickly that night.
Going into action meant deploying the SWAT team. Yes, the town of Apex has a SWAT team. Part-time, but nonetheless. About a dozen cops. Semi-automatic weapons, helmets, riot shields. My hand was among them. They drove to the house.
At the end of a cul-de-sac, we have the house completely surrounded by police officers. We've got, our weapons aimed at the house.
The SWAT team was hiding in the backyard. 2 cops behind a giant oak tree that gave them a view of the house. They were pretty sure the suspect was hiding upstairs with the hostages. It was tense.
You're going with the anticipation that you're going to see a mass murder, and you may end up having to, kill somebody tonight.
At 2 a.m., lights start to come on in the house. The suspect notices the SWAT team in his yard, grabs a shotgun, and moves down the stairs to the first floor landing. Somebody from the SWAT team screams, tells the suspect to disarm. And that's where what they thought was a hostage situation turns into something much stranger. The suspect puts down his gun and meets the SWAT team at the door, very confused. His wife, who's alive and also confused, is there with him. His children are alive and asleep in their beds. The homeowner had no idea what the cops were talking about, even though the 911 call had given the man's name, his address, and correctly identified the members of his family.
So I don't think we really, till afterwards, we realized, we've been swatted.
From Gimlet, I'm PJ Vogt, and this is Reply All, a show about the internet.
Okay, so I know that intro doesn't fully explain what swatting is or how it's connected to the internet, but use the link on your screen to download the full episode. It's a pretty interesting story, and you'll also get a good feel for Reply All, and if it's a podcast you want to subscribe to. On to podcast number 4, which is the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. So each episode of the Q&A is actually a Q&A or a question and answer session with a key player in a recent major movie. Often it's the director or producer or screenwriter or sometimes a key actor. The host, Jeff Goldsmith, has a history as a writer and editor of film industry magazines, so he knows how to run a good, relaxed but insightful discussion-based interview. Many of the podcast episodes are conducted on stage at the Los Angeles Film School in front of a live audience of film students who often get to ask their own questions in an audience Q&A at the end of the main interview. Anyhow, a good recent episode to check out if you want to sample the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is the February 18 episode, which is a Q&A with Luke Davies, who is the screenwriter of Lion. And, of course, the episode will be especially interesting if you've just seen Lion, as many millions have. That's the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith, and links to both the podcast and the specific Lion episode are on your screen. Last podcast this episode is Pod Save America. So this is a fairly new podcast born out of the US election, and the hosts are 4 guys who are aides to President Obama. 2 were speechwriters, one was an Obama spokesman, and the other a former White House communications director. Obviously, they now have a bit of time on their hands and have started the Pod Save America podcast as a running commentary on the Trump administration. So, of course it's biased, there's no pretense that it isn't, but as the name Pod Save America suggests, it's also a little bit tongue-in-cheek and it's meant to be entertaining. It's definitely very insightful, as I said earlier, the 4 hosts all worked in the White House until the start of this year. So it's kind of like the insiders now on the outside looking in. I'll just play you a short clip to give you a feel. So we pick it up where the panel is comparing the cabinet nomination and vetting processes of previous administrations to the way it's working now in the Trump administration.
When our nominees were going up, the Senate Finance Committee had a former IRS staffer who would go to the homes of nominees. And if you'd written off a room in your house for a write-off, they would measure the square footage to make sure you got it right. It was that level of insanity. I mean, it was probably way too far. But I mean, that's how far away we've gotten from traditional vetting of any kind of nominee.
And it's interesting because at the time, we've all been through, seen all kinds of vetting processes. I mean, even for little things like when the president goes to give a speech, you heavily vet the people that are going to be on stage. Everything is vetted within an inch of its life. And Trump has just abandoned all of that. He's standing on stage with like ex-mob guys. There's just no, and it turns out all you had to do was be completely shameless,
right?
And then none of these standards had were at all politically enforceable by pressure or press or anything.
So there you go. Just be completely shameless, and who knows how far it'll take you. That's Pod Save America. I've just started listening to it, and I think it's going to be one that'll stay on my playlist for quite a while. And that's it. 5 podcasts in a fair bit over 5 minutes, but hopefully it was worth it. All links are on your screen, and I'll be back next episode with 5 more. Thanks for listening.